Hello, welcome to the conversation here on News Central Television. I am Gbenga Aborowa. This is the program where we bring you all the latest updates and happenings and politics around the continent of Africa. Today on the conversation, our focus is on Uganda, where opposition party has signed a pact with the president, and in Malawi, where dozens have been arrested amidst anti-government protest. We begin in Uganda. The National Resistance Movement NRM party has signed a working cooperation agreement with the Democratic Party DP at State House in Entebbe. Uganda's President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, also the chairman of the National Resistance Movement party, signed on behalf of the party, while Nobert Mao signed on behalf of the DP, which he leads as President General. Speaking after the signing, Museveni congratulated Mao upon agreeing to work on steering DP to work with the NRM. He noted that this is something that should have happened at the top administrative level a long time ago. Now, joining us this evening on the conversation to discuss this development and its impact on Uganda's socio-political climate is Matua Job Richard. He's an aspirant for Vice Chairperson at the Central Executive Committee of the National Resistance Movement Party. And we also have Simon Ssenyonga, a legal practitioner. Both of them are joining live from the Ugandan capital, Kampala. Gentlemen, welcome to the conversation. A warm welcome to you both.
Thank you.
I'd like to start with Matua. What do you make of this development of the cooperation agreement signed between the Democratic Party and your party, the National Resistance Movement?
Yeah, thank you very much, my brother. The ruling party, National Resistance Movement, is a party with a philosophy of a broad-based coalition of all interest groups, all inclusive people of Uganda in an attempt to create what we call harmony in our political environment. This philosophy of broad-based, all-inclusive coalition is very, very important in that it helps us to solve the previous problems of our country where radicalism or extremism existed in the political arena. To take you back, our parties were being formed alongside the sectarian lines, religion, and tribe or ethnicity. So by NRM cooperating with the DP, it is not anything new. National Resistance Movement is doing the same thing in line with its philosophy of all-inclusive, broad-based coalition of people of Uganda in management of the politics of our country. In fact, we greatly welcome the cooperation agreement between our party and the Democratic Party, which also believes in a harmonious way of handling political matters than extremism or intolerance approach synonymous with the development of our political parties in Africa.
Okay, thank you very much,
Yes.
Matua. I would like to bring in Simon. Now, Simon, Mr. Nobert Mao, leader of Uganda's oldest political party since 2010, has previously been criticized by opposition elements. For example, the opposition National Unity Platform spokesperson, Joe Ssenyonga, said he has been hobnobbing with the ruling National Resistance Party movement. He says the cohabiting has ended and this cooperation signifies a wedding. Did this agreement come to you as a surprise?
Thank you very much. Now, I think for us to contextualize the discussion concerning the cooperation agreement between the Democratic Party and the National Resistance Movement, you need to appreciate the nature of the political terrain in Uganda. I partly agree with my colleague when he says that we come from a history of radicalization of the politics. But the question is this: who has created this environment? Number one, you want to look at the ruling government as a key player, which has made the playing ground for the opposition very undignified in the first place. Number two, very compromised in the second place. But the expected mode of reaction is one which is radical from the opposition. Now, because of that, it is unheard of that the people in the opposition can actually work with those in government. When my colleague Joel Ssenyonga, the spokesperson of the NUP, says that Mao has been cohabiting and now it's a full-blown marriage, he comes from the place, I would think, of number one, in Uganda, it would be unheard of that the opposition is working with the ruling government, because the masses have been prepared to believe that opposition working with the ruling party is a form of negative compromise. It's a form of indignity. Now, that is the obvious reaction. So for me, it's about appreciating the working environment and what has been said. Now, on the side of the opposition, you realize that there hasn't been principled discussion. So we have career politicians who are in the opposition because they have realized that Mr. Museveni is still here or has been here for a long time. So they make it an investment to be in the opposition. And what that means as an investment, then you're brought on the bargaining table, you're rewarded. So we have the kind of handout politics NRM, where you're given positions.
Interesting. And we'll get to that because we'll get to that during the course of our conversation. Now, Matua, social media platforms yesterday said Mr. Nobert Mao, they came up with a video, an old video of Nobert Mao, the DP chairman, on March the 6th, 2022, this year, a few months ago. He said, "I can never be bought," I'm quoting him here, "with money, and I can never join a government and leave my party behind." End of quote. Added the man who has at least made 3 attempts at the presidency democratically thwarted by Mr. Museveni, who he has signed a cooperation agreement is. What do you make of this? And do you think he was brought with money? And what's in it for him?
Yeah, thank you very much, my brother.
These are his own words, just a few months ago.
In the first place, I want to request you to understand that a democratization process is something which requires compromises from different political entities to arrive at a general consensus acceptable to all the groups. It is therefore very, very consistent with this principle that Democratic Party decided to cooperate with National Resistance Movement to build a new consensus, to do whatever thing they can do within and together to improve the process and democratization in this country.
Sorry, Matua, sorry to interrupt you there. I do agree with what you're saying. In politics, you have no permanent friends and enemies. It's about cooperation and development and deal making. But this man said he will never in his life move to the or be in cooperation with the government. How do you take that statement? And does it say a thing or two about the character of Mr. Nobert Mao?
Okay, thank you very much. I want to tell you, Nobert Mao is a politician of very high caliber and a very tested integrity. Nobert Mao and his political entity, Democratic Party, were never bought by National Resistance Movement. In fact, there is nowhere any clause mentioned in the cooperation agreement that the Democratic Party was purchased for a certain value of money. So it was purely an agreement based on principles, based on common values the two parties want to enhance, moving forward our country in terms of democracy. I said all this is about to deepen the process of democratization in Uganda and to ensure that we move into the transition, which is actually ongoing in a proper way, never to return back to the past history of bloodshed whenever a new president comes in. Thank you very much.
Okay, Matua. Simon, President Museveni just yesterday appointed opposition Democratic Party President Mr. Nobert Mao as the new Justice and Constitutional Affairs Minister. Are you surprised by this appointment, and is it part of the cooperation agreement between the Democratic Party and the NRM? Is this a quid pro quo deal?
I think, number one, you want to appreciate that, as my colleague said, Honorable Nobert Mao is qualified, more than qualified, not only to be minister, but to be even president of the nation. So you want to look at the historical analysis of how the party in question, the Democratic Party, has been dealing with the NRM. In the early 90s, you had the lead opposition figure then, Dr. Paul Kawanga Ssenyonga, being co-opted as a minister in the Museveni government. The biggest contention then was the status. Then we didn't have multi-party democracy. So what Nobert Mao has done is reshaping and rediscovering the path of multi-party democratic conversation in Uganda. So you asked, I'm having a look at the cooperation agreement here. When you read clause 9, it says that the Democratic Party will hold the following positions: Nobert Mao being Minister of Justice and Constitutional Affairs, then another Democratic leader appointed to a junior position, but also they go ahead to say that the DP will hold some positions in state agencies and government parastatals and bodies. At least they will recommend at least 4 people. So what does this reintroduce? Number one, the politics of bargaining for positions as a way of influencing discussions in terms of government agenda. And I think what Nobert Mao is doing is to extend the discussion which has been happening in the East African community. So you have the history, for example, in Kenya, where you had the BBI by Raila Odinga and Uhuru Kenyatta. And in Uganda, we are now beginning to have that discussion. So is it a quid pro quo? I think partly yes, partly no. To the extent that, number one, common perception is that as long as opposition begins working with government, then it becomes monetary. But on the alternative also, that the government has set a platform, the ruling party has set a platform, whereby it makes it extremely hard for the opposition to operate. But if they are to operate with them, it will not be again as a matter of principle, I repeat. So the cooperation agreement states that it's being made in good faith as a matter of democratic principle. But that's on the presumption that Uganda is a democratic state, meaning that there is respect of democratic principles, and there is a respect of democratic institutions, which is non-existent. So it becomes a matter of co-option as opposed to cooperation. What you have is an apparent cooperation, but could turn out into a merger of the DP and the NRM, and subsequently the death of political parties. Finally, on this, the president, while swearing in 2016, said that by 2021, he is determined not to have opposition in Uganda, that he will have ruled them out. I think there's been a consistent move. You begin by
but that's
the UPC.
That's not a democratic thing to say.
Sorry, just repeat that.
It's not a democratic thing to say that you don't. I mean, oppositions are part of what makes a democracy viable and thrive.
I mean, that comes from the presumption that Uganda is a fully democratic state. So we have, again, you speak from the place of a colonized African who is assuming that, for example, Uganda or Nigeria, where you are, is a fully democratic state as it's supposed to be. So that's very idealistic. It's not realistic. In Uganda, the facts change. So as opposed to, having flowery language here, we need to interrogate the core facts. Is Uganda a democratic state? Emphatically, no, to the root of it. Are we having a semblance of it? Are we making fundamental steps towards that direction?
Yes.
I think we are beginning that conversation.
Thank you, Simon. I'd like to bring in Matua. Matua, while some have criticized this deal, this cooperation agreement between the DP and NRM, others believe that the union will better govern the country and offer services to citizens. What are your thoughts on this? Is this beneficial to Ugandans in general, or beneficial to, high-ranking members of the Democratic Party and their cronies?
Yeah, thank you very much. In the first place, I want to put forward two things. Number one, Uganda is a democratic country. Our democracy may not be that very highly advanced, but democracy anywhere in this world, including the United States of America, is still developing. If you are aware, just recently, a sitting president in the United States of America rejected the results, claiming they were cheating. So I want to tell my brother, there is a democracy in Uganda, but what the Democratic Party has done with the NRM is to deepen the process of democratization of the country so that our democracy can be made better. So it is therefore improper for you as a lawyer to say there is no democracy in Uganda when we have elections after every 5 years period. And very many people have been changed. Yes, we have not changed the president.
But Matua, allow me to play devil's advocate here. How do you have a democracy when one party has been in government for 36 years? I mean, the principles of democracy does imbibe, they have constitutional term limits. Does that
the essence of democracy is for people to choose the party or the people they want to lead them. So NRM has been in Uganda, leading Uganda for a very long time because Ugandans themselves have been voting for it. So it is by choice, not by force. Therefore,
so why do we see a high...
I want to agree with you that the democracy may not be that sound, but I can tell you democracy anywhere, including in Nigeria, is still limping. So that the limping of the democracy should not be used as an excuse to say that we don't have democracy. We have democracy, yes, but we must all work together to deepen it. That's why DP has come up with the NRM to see how the process of democratization can be deepened in our country to move forward.
Okay, thank you, Matua. Simon, in other developments away from the cooperation agreement between DP and NRM, President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni addressed Ugandans from Nasakero on Wednesday, and he has defended his government's decision not to give subsidies or reduce taxes in the wake of sharp rise in prices of commodities. What do you make of this, and what options does the government have in making life easier for ordinary Ugandans?
Well, I think the biggest justification for the president not to offer subsidization for commodities, even when the prices are hiking, is that, for example, for the fuel, he says that should we subsidize our fuel, then there will be
hemorrhaging of the foreign.
Yes, but also, secondly, he wants to stick to what I would call the sort of communist tendencies, again, of big government, big control of the state and the economy. I mean, let's take a comparative analysis for us to have a much more objective discussion. Look at what is happening in Kenya. The president of Kenya has subsidized the posho. He has offered subsidies, especially on the fuel, therefore to ease movements. Now, in Uganda, you're having the president saying that I'm taking a firm stand either way without without compromising whatsoever. So what you have is that the president is not learning sufficient lessons. And I say that in the spirit of the East African community integration, which he has continuously pushed for. I think as we speak, he must be even in Tanzania or somewhere around East Africa to push further for the common market in East Africa. How do you intend to have a common market when you're not willing to even save your nationals, but you are sticking to harsh policies and you're failing to learn at least at a much more from your neighbors who are a much more bigger economy than us, yet we have all the means. So I think the attitude of communist oppression still comes out, but also secondly, he keeps on justifying. When you listen to his speech of Wednesday, the first justification for these measures was again rooted in the background of the government policy response during the COVID-19. So again, just to marry the two topics we are discussing, I'll give you an example. When you look at the cooperation agreement signed between Honorable Mao and Mr. Museveni, one of the statements in the preamble is that the NRM government for the next 5 years is implementing a COVID-19 recovery plan. Now, how would you call it a COVID-19 recovery plan when you're not willing even to subsidize the most basic goods for your people, when you're only increasing the fees, when you're failing to put in place measures that can curb the financial hemorrhage happening in the country, which would have saved majority of the Ugandans. So for me, it's a hard stance not informed by the best interests of the nationals, but rather international public image, international oppression, and also communist responses towards our local policies.
Thank you, Simon. Now, Matua, I would like you to respond to this, but we did notice protests. There were protests in Ginger a few weeks ago. 17 people were arrested. Opposition leader Dr. Kizza Besigye was once arrested for, demonstrating against the high prices of commodities. And the president, the chairman of your party, the National Resistance Movement Party, President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, has said, look, we're not going to subsidize, we're not going to cut taxes, that we just have to ride the storm. What do you make of this as a father of the nation and seeing that quite a number of the citizens are going through hardship? There's reports of people starving in Karamoja. What can the president do and your party to alleviate the sufferings and deal with this soaring prices of commodities and the cost of living in Uganda?
Thank you very much, my brother. In the first place, I want to tell you that some economic decisions are suicidal. Providing subsidies have effects on the economy. And I can point out an example of Sri Lanka's situation, whereby the foreign reserve was drained out, and then the country ran out of foreign reserve. And what was the final conclusion? The final end was the overthrow of an elected government. The argument of President Yoweri Museveni and the NRM government is that providing subsidies may not actually solve the problem itself. It may just be a momentary way of delaying the same problem. We want to address these issues comprehensively. If it is the issue of fuel prices, which is caused by one of the conflicts we have in Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia, can we have our fuel processing fast-tracked so that we can begin to have our own fuel? Remember, Uganda is in the process of coming up with its own refinery.
That will take some time. But looking at your neighbors in the East African community, they appear to be doing something. Tanzania and Kenya are doing something to alleviate the sufferings of their people.
Yes, I am coming there. Actually, part of the problem we have in terms of the rising commodity prices is as a result of low production in terms of the food item. This is in the East African community. For example, Kenya is having a shortage of unga. Unga, that is maize flour, which is actually eaten by the majority of the Kenyan. So the step the Kenyan government took was to allow more import of unga or the maize flour into Kenya by lifting the restriction they had put, the ban on importation that they had put, so that can bring in more supply, which will stabilize the price. But I can tell you that you cannot apply subsidies forever. Therefore, subsidization of price is a temporary process.
Okay.
This is what my government believes, that we cannot rely on it. Doing so is just like solving a problem using a temporary means.
Thank you very much. I'd like to say a big thank you to both of you gentlemen, Matua Richard and Simon Ssenyonga, for being a part of the conversation today. We do appreciate your insights and contributions. You're watching The Conversation here on News Central Television. We'll go on a quick break, and when we return, we'll switch gears to Malawi, where our attention has been turned to protest in the country, where police said about 76 protesters are expected to appear in court today to face charges of unlawful assembly and inciting violence. We'll return to part 2 after this break. Please stay with us. You're welcome back to the conversation. We're now turning our attention to Malawi, where police said about 76 protesters are expected to appear in court to face charges of unlawful assembly and inciting violence. This follows the arrest on Wednesday when protests against the high cost of living led to clashes with police and the looting of shops in the capital, Lilongwe. The clashes started after the High Court of Malawi granted an injunction to business owners who wanted to block the protesters from property damage. Those arrested include 4 leaders of human rights ambassadors groups which organized the demonstrations. Some rights campaigners accused the police of using excessive force in trying to stop the trying to stop the protest. Government spokesperson Gospel Kazako said as much as the government respects people's rights to hold peaceful demonstrations, it is unfortunate that organizers of Wednesday's protest defied a court order to stop the planned protest. Now, joining me live this evening from the Malawian capital, Lilongwe, is Susgo Chitete, Assistant Bureau Chief of the Nation Publications Limited. I also have political scientist Ndule Omakasungula, a human rights activist. They both joined from Lilongwe, Malawi. Gentlemen, a warm welcome to you both and thanks for joining us on the conversation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'd like to start with you, Susgo. The protests were held to protest the high cost of commodities, which is as a result of global economic realities. Similar protests have also been held in different parts of the world. What's your take on yesterday's protest?
Well, I would say the protests were never supposed to take place because there was an 11th hour court order stopping the same. But I would say the protests, are justified. These are citizens with their own rights. If they see things going wrong, they have a right to show their frustration. So what is regrettable, though, is where people go to the court and they obtain an injunction at an 11th hour, which also somehow inflamed the illegal protests, if I call them so.
Now, thank you, Susgo. Ndule, protests in Malawi last November brought President Lazarus Chakwera's honeymoon to an abrupt end. Yesterday, we saw another round of protests. What was the government's response to the protest? And do you think the people are being hard on President Chakwera, knowing he came into office in the middle of a pandemic, plus the global economy is suffering as a result of the effects of the Russian-Ukraine war? What's your take on all of this?
I think, honestly speaking, Malawi is going through socio-economic challenges. And I think the people themselves are just responding to some of the challenges the country is facing currently. So, as socio said, I think as Malawians, they have the right to express their feelings, their hardships. They don't think to improve because, as you are saying, the Tonse government, actually, they were coming in, they promised Malawians a lot of things. But I think the country is right now struggling. They cannot meet the promises which they promised Malawians. So I think
Ndule, sorry to interrupt you, Ndule. You do know that, and your point is fair because the government promised they will do this and that, and then COVID happened, and we now have this war in Ukraine, which are not exactly the doings or the results of President Lazarus Chakwera. He didn't cause the war in Ukraine and he didn't bring about COVID. So don't you think the people Malawians should at least be realistic about their expectations and maybe they should adjust it a little bit?
I think what government is failing is, I think, to explain to the people why the current environment is, why there's the economic challenges. I think Malawi thinks the government is failing to unpack the issues, to convince Malawians that Malawi is not an island. We are part and parcel of the global world. And what is happening in other countries also affecting Malawi. So this is a challenge, but I think it's all about politics now. To me, I feel that the issues are more political now, because the other issues which are coming in that the president should trim his powers in terms of presidential immunity. So if you look behind the scene, you find the issues are diverting now from the socio-economic to become political, and more coming like a regime change program again. So these are the issues which I think as a government, as Malawi, they need to be very cautious in how they would want to handle the current situation in the country.
Thank you, Ndule. I would like to bring in wonderful Nkuche, a political scientist who joins us also from Lilongwe. Now, wonderful, what has the government's response been to rising commodity prices and its resultant hardship on ordinary citizens of Malawi?
Yeah, thank you for hosting me. I'm currently in Zomba, not Lilongwe. Zomba, the old capital city. Yeah. As already said, there are challenges, economic challenges. And as he said, there is issue about communication for people to understand. But then we also have to realize that is exactly why people voted for a government that shouldn't just react to what is happening around, but a government which is able to find solutions to the challenges that we are going through. And then another thing that is distracting most people is that the government right now is not only handling the economic situation, but we can also take note of politics that is happening. And by politics, the government that we have got in as an alliance. And then we see some of the alliance partners, they are fighting for who is going to lead the alliance in the next coming elections. So people are frustrated with such kind of things. The economic challenges are there, people can understand them. But then they are also looking at politicians that are power hungry. All they want is about who is going to lead. And then on the other hand, we also have corruption allegations that are involving high-ranking government officials, including the name of the vice president is being mentioned. So when people are looking at these stories, they cannot understand whatever government can say about the economic challenges. It will be hard for them to understand. You know, normally it's easy to understand someone whom you are seeing that they are trying to live up to the situation. But here the government is trying to explain, and then the next day what you see is the alliance partners are fighting, and then the other day you see the corruption allegations. So it is putting government in a fix.
Thank you, wonderful. I'd like to bring in Suzgu. Suzgu, June 2022, just last month, made it 2 years since President Lazarus Chakwera was sworn in as President of the Republic of Malawi. He ran for office on the mantra of change, and he promised 1 million jobs and a turnaround of the Malawian economy. My question to you is, how much positive change has Malawi witnessed so far, and how would you rate his administration?
Well, thank you so much. I think I pretty missed what Wandaf said because I couldn't recapture. I would say when Malawians went for, voting in June 2020 for the fresh presidential elections, they had a lot of hope because, they were coming from a background where there was a lot of corruption in the country, nepotism, tribalism, and the new administration, the Tons administration, had promised, the moon. But 2 years after, all we see are broken promises and lies, half-truths. They have really failed to live up to what they promised the people. So, for example, some of the things that Ndule also mentioned about, which are quite straightforward, where the president talked about appointing a cabinet on merit and not necessarily out of political connections. But we saw a cabinet that was full of family relations, people that are close to the president, the cabinet that never inspired. I remember writing the first story about this cabinet, and we called it, we called the president a family man, because typically what he did in this first cabinet was to include family members. So
but
he disappointed from the
He's reshuffled that cabinet now, and has that led to any improvements of any sort?
Nothing like an improvement. We still have the same faces in the same cabinet, and this cabinet is bloated, unlike the previous cabinet under the previous administration, where we had a 20-member cabinet. But here we have almost 30 members of cabinet. And again, the president said he would subject his cabinet to a periodic performance assessment, and these results would be made public. Ministers would be interviewed publicly. So those that failed the assessment will be kicked out, and new ones will be brought on board. We haven't seen that assessment taking place. He said after 5 months, and that assessment has not happened for 2 years. The president himself said, he would want to reduce his own powers as a president. 2 years after, we still see a president who wields too much power, just like his predecessors. He said police officers would not be lined along the street as his convoy passes from one place to another. We see police officers lined up the street. He is also the chancellor of the public universities, something that he promised that he would not be the chancellor of the public university. So here you see somebody who has typically failed to live by what he promised. And these are not too hard things to change. Along the way, we hear the president saying, reducing his powers is not his priority. So there are several examples where, you talk about corruption itself. There are more cases of corruption under this new regime. His own, he has fired some of his top aides, from advisors to some of the ministers. They're answering corruption charges. So this again, it's one of the broken promises, I would say. And if we were to add on that list, we have also seen some questionable appointments. You'd actually see the president, the president's daughter was appointed from a diplomatic mission, in London. Then, such kind of things don't really inspire confidence from what he promised. I think the one positive I should add, maybe it's about women empowerment. Really, we have seen a significant number of women occupying very important positions. Just today, we've woken up to some good news where the president has appointed a female for an inspector general of police. So that is the move in the right direction.
Okay.
But there are more promises that have been broken, that have not been fulfilled, and the positives really are outnumbered by the negatives, I should say.
Thank you, Susgu. Ndule, Susgu did touch on the topic of corruption. President Lazarus Chakwera, a pastor turned politician, said the fight against corruption was one of the pillars of his campaign. And my question is, how has he performed so far in terms of ridding Malawi of corruption? We've seen high-profile cases. Even his own vice president has been investigated. He did get rid of the Inspector General of Police for allegations of corruption. So how would you score his performance when it comes to corruption?
Yeah, I think honestly speaking, I think he's doing fine in terms of fighting corruption, although challenges are there. Because for the first time, I think we saw ministers being arrested and charged, and for the first time again, the whole ACB report, which implicated the vice president and the other high officials in government, being released to Malawians. So to me, this is very, very positive. And I think as a president, he's committed to fighting corruption, but I think he might have some challenges in terms of how you want to address the issues. Because if you look at the report of corruption, almost the whole system is implicated. Now, how does the president deal with that issue? It will be very difficult for him. But I think that's why it's important for the Anti-Corruption Bureau itself to be fully independent so that they can handle the issues of corruption for the interest and benefit of Malawians. Because Malawians, I think, are looking forward to see how the president is going to deal with those people who have been implicated. Already, he made a decision in terms of the vice president and some other officials like the IG and the chief of staff. But there's a long list of key government officials in terms of their involvement
So
in the
there's
SATA.
still much more work to be done. Thank you, Ndule. And finally, wonderful, just before we wrap up our conversation, President Chikwera promised to create 1 million jobs and set Malawi on the path to being as rich as South Africa or Botswana by the 2060s, upper middle income countries with GDP per capita of about $5,500 and $6,000 respectively. These are ambitious goals for a country with a GDP below $700 per capita. Is there still time for President Chikwera to salvage his record before the next elections? I would appreciate if you can answer this question in less than a minute. Wonderful.
Yes, the next election is going to be in May 2025, and that is almost 3 years from now. So to say that there is enough time, I do not think that is the case. The president was supposed to set the ball rolling from June 2020 when he got into office. But now 2 years has gone in as far as the 1 million job promise is concerned. 2 years has gone. We haven't seen anything about that promise. Although the government claims that they have done something, but as Malawians, we are yet to see that. So in the next coming election, that is one of the promises that is going to haunt the president and also the entire alliance if it will still be together by the next election. So realistically, there is no time for the president to salvage himself in as far as that promise is concerned, because time has already been lost.
I'd like to say a very big thank you to you, gentlemen. Susgo Chitete from Lilongwe, wonderful Nkuche from Zomba, and Ndule Wakasungula also joining from Lilongwe. Thank you very much for being a part of this broadcast, and we do appreciate your insights. This is where we draw the curtains on today's edition of The Conversation. In the first half of the show, we did look at protests. We did look at the cooperation agreement signed between the Democratic Party and the ruling National Resistance Movement in Uganda. And we just concluded our conversation on commodity price increases protests in Malawi. On behalf of the team and I'll say thank you to you all for being a part of the program. Until next time, I'm Gbenga Aborowa. Bye-bye.